Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real thrill for us to have so many great speakers and such a wonderful audience for this important event on the upcoming Ghanaian elections. This event is being brought to you by the International Development Department of the University of Birmingham and the Centre for Elections, Democracy, Accountability and Representation, that's CEDAR, of the University of Birmingham. I'm Nick Cheeseman. I'm the Professor of Democracy at IDD, and I'm also the Director of CEDAR. So it's a particular honor for me to be able to welcome you today, and in particular, our fantastic set of panelists. We really couldn't have hoped for a more prestigious, insightful group of people to talk us through the election campaign that we're looking forward to in Ghana this year. As many of you will know, this is the year of elections. That means we're going to have more people going to the polls than ever before, we think. Of course, some of those elections have now been postponed. Some have been cancelled. Some citizens might not go to the polls for a variety of reasons. So one of the questions we might have in the backs of our minds today is the year of elections going to be a boom for democracy, or is it actually going to be a year in which we worry about the fate of democracy? So as we discuss the particulars in Ghana, I'll also be encouraging our panelists to reflect on where is Ghana in its struggle for democracy many years on now from the return of multi-party politics, and what might the Ghanaian context tell us about that broader process of the year of elections globally. Ghana, of course, will be one of the last countries to cast its ballots this year. Now, I'm delighted to say that joining me today is Sharon Bradu, who is the 2022 Mo Ibrahim Foundation Scholar at the University of Birmingham, studying the MSc that we have in Development Policy and Politics. She's currently the Communications Intern at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and she's a keen interest in using various communication methods to create spaces for conversations on politics and governance in Africa. That's particularly relevant today because Sharon really did all of the work for this event. So while I'm chairing it, it's important to note that Sharon put in the work. She had the idea. She did most of the work in terms of contacting panelists. She put everything together, including all the great adverts that you will have seen. So thank you, Sharon, for the incredible work that you've put into this. And Sharon is going to be our moderator today. So from now on, I'm going to pass over to her. She will then introduce the panelists and moderate the discussion. One quick thing from me just before we get going is just for everybody to remember that this is a webinar function for Zoom. So we have a Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You should see a box that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can insert questions at any time. What we'll do at the end of the discussion is, first of all, the panelists will have an opportunity to engage with each other and respond to anything that's been said. And then, of course, we want to make this as interactive as possible. If you put your questions in the Q&A, we'll do our very best to raise them to the panel and make sure that they get responded. So please do use the Q&A function. Please remember that we are being recorded. And Sharon, thank you so much for your hard work on this, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for the introduction. And again, let me extend a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this event. And to our amazing speakers, we really appreciate you being here, and we are looking forward to your submissions. Again, my name is Sharon, and I'm going to be the moderator for this event. So before I introduce the speakers and allow them to make their own submissions, I want to give you a flow of how the discussion is going to go. So the speakers will be briefly introduced one at a time, and they'll be given the opportunity to make their submissions for 6 minutes after the introduction. And after the submission from all the speakers, they'll be given a chance to respond to each other. And then after that, we'll have the Q&As where your questions will be addressed. So like Nick said, please don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A chat box. So we're going to start with our first speaker. Our first speaker is the CEO of Afrobarometer, an organization that I've become quite acquainted to since working with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. And I hope you have heard about them too. They track public attitudes on economic, social, and political issues on the continent, introducing to some and presenting to others our first speaker, Dr. Joseph Asunka. Dr. Joseph, you can make your submissions now.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank Nick for this invitation. It's great to be with you, and I've seen a good number of people to turn out. It's quite great. So really thank you for making this. So my remarks, first of all, just to put the caveat that I would have to drop off at some point because I'm sitting at the airport now. So sorry about that. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, just to present some of the data that we have collected. I'm Ghanaian, but I'll refrain from putting in my own remarks first. I'll talk about what the people think and what the people have said to us in the last several years about democratic governance in Africa, in Ghana. And then if I have managed to stay around, I may respond to any questions that may come up. So as Sharon said, I work on the Afrobarometer. We are a Pan-African Survey Research Network. And the last time we did the survey in Ghana was in 2002. So some of the data I'm going to share now is just drawing from the 2002 data, but looking back on time in terms of how some of the trends have tracked over time. I mean, I would segment this into three parts. There's the good news, there's the great news, and there's the not so good news, okay? So the good news is that Ghanaians want democracy. They love democracy. Majorities want to see their country continue to thrive as a democracy. So when we asked the last time in 2002, we had more than 80% of Ghanaians say they prefer democracy to any other form of government. Roughly the same proportion also prefers the core institutions of democratic governance. They want elections as a mechanism for choosing leaders. They want to be able to hold their leaders accountable. They want multi-party competition, and they want rule of law and all the core democratic institutions. Ghana has consistently been on the high side. 70% and above support the core democratic norms and institutions. And as I said, more than 80% prefer democracy to any other system of government. Even when it comes to military rule or other authoritarian forms of government, Ghanaians roundly reject those. More than 80% reject one-man rule, reject one-party rule, and almost 70% reject military rule. So that's the good news side. So support for democracy and the commitment to democratic norms and institutions is very high in the country. The great news is that most Ghanaians, more than 80%, want a government that is accountable to them. So they prefer an accountable government to a government that is effective, even if it is not accountable. And so often we hear the case of people thinking that if a government is effective in delivering economic goods, people may not care about democratic institutions, but that is not the case in Ghana. And it is not the case for the most part on the continent, that people increasingly want their governments to be accountable to them. When we look over the last 10 years, demand for accountable governance in Ghana has actually increased almost by 20 percentage points between 2014 and today. And so it means that we have what I call it the great news because it shows a deepening of Ghanaians' commitment to democracy and democratic governance. Okay, so that's the good and the great news. I think the not so good news is on the supply side. What elected leaders have been able to deliver to citizens, given the expectations that they have. So on the supply side, unfortunately, we realize that Ghanaians, the extent to which Ghanaians think that their country is a democracy. One of the questions we ask is, do you think your country is a democracy? And that percentage has really declined over time. In the last 10 years, it has dropped by 21 percentage points. That Ghanaians are becoming more and more disillusioned about the state of their own democracy. The second part is that when we ask whether people are satisfied with the way democracy is working, this has also declined, but the decline has been quite steep in the last 5 years. Between 2017 and 2022, we recorded a 29 percentage point drop in the number of people who are satisfied with the way democracy works in the country. And then when we ask about other issues about politics and governance, we have large majorities in the country saying that people have to be careful what they say about politics. So there's some level of self-censorship in the country. That political party competition often leads to violence, which is a concern for most Ghanaians. People also feel like different categories of people are treated unequally under the law, especially ordinary people compared to public officials. And that whenever public officials commit crime, they tend to go away free, and only the ordinary people really get punished for it. And so this is the context where I said, the not so good news when it comes to the supply side of democracy. Then I'll conclude on the issues about the economy, how Ghanaians view their economic situation. This too, we have seen a real negative expression of Ghanaians' feelings towards the economy and the performance of government, especially in the last 5 years. When we asked Ghanaians generally, what is the direction of your country? We have had almost 90% of Ghanaians saying that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And this was in 2002. And this actually represents a 28 percentage point increase since 2017. And so just in the last 5 years, we've had this sense of Ghanaians feeling that the country is heading in the wrong direction. This, of course, Afrobarometer has been conducting surveys in Ghana since 1999, and this has been the biggest decline we've ever recorded in the history of our surveys in the country. The same way, when we ask Ghanaians about other issues in terms of government's economic management, when it comes to improving health services, addressing educational needs, providing water and sanitation, and providing reliable electricity, especially reliable electricity. In 2002, this also recorded the biggest drop in terms of the percentage of people who feel the government is not doing well in those spaces. And so all of this to say that on the democratic governance side, the delivery is really weak. When it comes to the economic management, Ghanaians are becoming increasingly disillusioned. On top of this, there is a high perception of corruption in high places, which is also another killer. In our data analysis, we've seen that corruption is one of the factors that actually corrodes or erodes people's confidence in democratic governance. And that has been a critical component of assessment for our service. And so in broad terms, without putting in my own perspective, I do think that if the upcoming elections were a kind of assessment of or evaluation of the state of the economy, then the managers of the economy currently will have troubles really making their message clear to Ghanaians. I rest my case here. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Doc. The managers of the economy would really have a hard time making their message clear. So now we've gotten an overview of Ghanaians' perception on democracy, and our next speaker is going to give us a more theoretical overview on democracy in Ghana. So Professor Jeffrey Haynes, an emeritus professor of politics at London Metropolitan University here in the UK, is our next speaker. He recently published a book on Ghana's democracy, and I'm keen to hear what he has to submit. So over to you, Prof.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm just setting my timer so I don't do more than my 6 minutes, because I know that it's important. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, I published last year a book on the Rawlings era in Ghana, the PNDC era between the early 1980s and the early 1990s, when, of course, Rawlings became the elected president of Ghana for 2 terms, bowing out eventually in 2001. And I'm struck by the parallels between the Rawlings era and the present time in Ghana. During the Rawlings era, as many of you will know, there was a palpable sense that the country was going in the wrong direction, that there had been various kinds of governments, the military governments, of course, and elected governments, but no form of government had really managed to deliver what Ghanaians wanted. And of course, what Ghanaians want is, as we heard from the last speaker, they want representative, accountable government. They want an improving economy. They want a culture of freedom to express their views and so on. Not much seems to have changed in the 40 years now since the Rawlings era. And in fact, just yesterday, one of Ghana's most prominent theologians, Nicholas Duncan-Williams, referred to the 1979 and 1981 period as a period where Ghanaians were simply unhappy and were not passive, and violence erupted. And he was likening today to that particular time. There's, of course, a great difference between 1979 and 1981 and 2024, not least that today Ghanaians have experienced 30 years of a functioning liberal democracy. My impression is, as we heard from the last speaker, that the support for democracy in Ghana is very, very high, but in a theoretical sense, in an abstract sense, because There are fears about corruption. There are widespread fears about how government is not accountable, how government acts without concern for the people, that politicians are only interested in the people every 4 years when elections come. None of this, of course, is Ghanaian only. Around the world, people have such fears. But the danger that I see is that the next electoral campaign for the presidency will be between the two heavyweights, the NDC candidate and the MVP candidate, unless something dramatic happens and a third candidate comes in to upset the apple cart, which I don't see happening. Both candidates, Dr. Bob-Milliar and Mr. Mahama, are promising quite a lot for the new era. There's a danger, of course, that if politicians promise a lot and don't deliver, then skepticism or cynicism about democracy increases even further. One of the concerns about the candidates that I've understood is that each comes from a different religious background, and this will be the first time in Ghana that the presidential elections has featured leading candidates from two of Ghana's main religions. In the past, they've always been Christians. Now, there is a danger, perhaps, that Ghana's long-standing and well-deserved reputation for religious tolerance and indeed religious harmony could be affected by the electoral campaign because, of course, politicians want to get elected and they are likely to use tricks which are not that clean, dirty tricks to get support. And one of the concerns that I have is that some in Ghana will not be happy with a president who is not of their religious faith because they feel that others than themselves would benefit mostly from that particular circumstance. There's nothing the presidential candidates can do to make that fear go away, but I just want to register it as a concern as the election nears. The other two things, and I'll give a minute to both, is corruption. And I don't know how long now that every electoral campaign is focused on corruption, yet nothing improves. The perceptions of Ghanaians is that nothing improves. Many Ghanaians believe that to get political office is to invite corruption, is to improve yourself financially by fair means or foul once in power. That has to be changed. There has to be a mechanism and method to make corruption unacceptable in Ghana. And the only way to do that is to have stronger institutions. It's no good expecting people to be moral. They need institutions which will check on what they do and punish them if they do badly. The other thing, of course, is the wider point about the economy. Mr. Mahama is promising a 24-hour economy, which seems to be, to me, a race to the bottom, that Ghanaians will be expected to work harder and longer for perhaps less to try and compete with other countries that are doing such a thing. On the other hand, the Ghana economy is in the doldrums. The cedi is declining rapidly in value. Something needs to be done to the economy. But the danger, perhaps, is promising that certain president will do more than he can achieve, and that Ghanaians become even more disillusioned with democracy. And the danger there, I think, finally, is that they will simply not bother to vote. They will say, well, okay, democracy is fine in the abstract, it doesn't deliver, why should we bother with it? Why don't we try a strong government, maybe a military government? And that, I think, is the road to a very insecure and poor future for the country. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your submissions. So far, we've been hearing a lot about Ghanaians' love for democracy that's in the abstract, but never really manifested practically and physically for the people to actually enjoy the benefits of democracy. And Paul did mention us having strong institutions to ensure that we curb all the negative effects that comes with corruption. So moving on to our next speaker, she's the Executive Director of the Accra-based West African Regional Office of Abantu for Development, an organization promoting women's rights and gender justice in the policies in Ghana, Africa, and beyond. I invite Dr. Rose Mensah-Kuttin to take the stage. Over to you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you for enabling me to be part of this very important discussion on this year's elections. I'm going to focus on women's participation in the elections. And I want to start off by emphasizing the historical role that women have always played in Ghana's quest towards democracy. And I think that we can trace that history from the pre-colonial period up until now. And so election is located within that historical fact that Ghanaian women have always been active in electioneering processes because they also believe that a pluralistic society is much better than a closed society. And so Ghanaian women also buy into the quest for democracy. Over the years, we have, as women, used our capacities, the spaces that we occupy, to ensure that at every point in time, we are able to participate effectively, especially when it comes to elections. And I think that this is something that we do and will continue to do. The stakes are very high at this point because since 2011, we have been fighting for the passage of an affirmative action bill into that will enable a much more visible participation of women in key public spaces. Talk about the executive, the legislature, and also the judiciary. Of course, the judiciary, you find a lot of lawyers there and so on. And we have had 2 female chief justices. But generally, when it comes to decision-making, public decision-making, you find that women's representation is very low. We don't have enough time to look at the figures. But if you look at the numbers of women who are offering themselves as aspirants for this coming elections as a parliamentary candidates, it signals a cause for worry because currently we have only 47 women who are standing. And interestingly, 33 of them come from the opposition party NDC, and the NPP, the NPP party is offering 13 women. And I think this is very interesting. Also, if you look at the figures in the past, there has always been many more women coming from the NPP than the NDC. And so this tells us something about the complacency of the incumbency. I think that if you have been in office for 8 years and you want to retain your governance, you really need to look at the population and see the character of the population. I mean, Ghana is made up of women and men, and indeed women even outnumber men. And so if you find out that the election you are going for, the numbers that you are filing for women is so low, then it tells us that really what people have been saying about complacency, about lack of consultation and so on is actually true. Now with the opposition party, it points to an interest in really taking over after 8 years of rule. And you know, some of these things, they tell us something about the society. They tell us about how people have felt that they are marginalized, how people have felt that they have not had a voice, because these numbers are not high, but they tell us what is going on in the society in terms of complacency versus change, sort of, I mean, but it doesn't signal any transformation that maybe the other party would do better and so on. So basically, we are interested in women's effective participation because we do play a role in the electioneering campaign, voter education. We also go out to vote, and we mobilize young people to serve as observers during voting and all of that. And so when we are talking about representation and participation, it's not just about numbers, but numbers are important, because women want to be part of the decisions of this country. I think that one of my colleagues talked about the economy. Anytime the economy is in crisis, it is women who actually bear the brunt because they are primarily responsible for the maintenance of the household, and therefore they are busy eking out a livelihood for household members. And so that has also played a role in terms of how women have demonstrated interest in filing as representatives of their constituencies and their electoral areas. So it is a real challenge as far as 2024 election is concerned. But we are not worried and we are not pessimistic, because we have always struggled. We have organizations that have set themselves up to always be there and be a voice of women. And so that will continue during the period of preparation, during the period of the elections itself and after. So this is work that we have committed ourselves to do. We are hoping that maybe by magic or some turn of events, the affirmative action bill will be passed, and then we can seize on that as a momentum and really galvanize support from our male colleagues and also from the women. And then we can get a mass of women getting into parliament. I'm not very, I'm optimistic always, but with that happening, I'm not so sure. And so, yeah, this is the situation. Women are very disillusioned about the spaces that they occupy, which is always the space of hard work, the space of double burden, and the space where their voices are usually muted. But at the same time, we have strong women's organizations. We have networks and coalitions that we work through with our male counterparts, and we are hoping for the best. We know that Ghana will remain a democratic state and that it will become much more inclusive and pluralistic as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. Representation is not always about numbers, but numbers are important because women want to be part of public decision making. Thank you so much for your submission. We're moving on to our next speaker. He is an associate professor in African Studies at the History and Politics Department and the director of Center for Cultural and African Studies in my alma mater, KNUST. Let's welcome Professor George Bob-Milliar.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this eminent panel. I see so many familiar faces, so I'm at home, and thank those of our colleagues joining online. Yes, Ghana has done something that is seen as a model, which is having succeeded in establishing very strong political parties. 2 years ago, something I think very significant happened, but we didn't celebrate it that much, which is that for the first time in the entire period of Ghana's post-colonial history, political parties have survived continuously for 30 solid years, and this is an achievement. So in 2022, the National Democratic Congress, the New Patriotic Party, they all reached 30 years in continuous development. So this is very significant in the sense that you look at the political party organization and what it has done for Ghana's democracy, and essentially what Ghana celebrates electoral democracy is actually party democracy. And what it has succeeded in doing is to create these very strong two major political parties that have dominated the electoral landscape. You see that in this context that we are discussing, in the context of elections this year, the political parties that are well organized, and here again, we are referring to the big 10 political parties, the incumbent and the opposition, is having succeeded in mobilizing resources, and the resources that have enabled them to establish party organizations across the length and breadth of the country. As we speak, the two major political parties, except with the incumbent, the NDC's ticket is set. It's elected, started with national officers. It moved to a presidential candidate. It's completed that with a random mate. So the NDC's ticket is complete and it's already in the field campaigning. The NPP's ticket is partial in the sense that it has a presidential candidate, the incumbent vice president, that is running across the country, trying to get his message across. But of course, he's yet to get a running mate. But to talk in terms of what these political organizations mean for the election and what it implies when you look at Ghana's democracy, it's the monopoly. Eventually, what we've consolidated is a duopoly dominated by the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress. And the talk in town is that Ghanaians appear to be fed up with these two major political parties. And we've reached a point where, to quote some scholar, what we have are choiceless opportunities. We just have these two, and because of the challenge with the two, having experimented with the two and the results of their governance, is something that is concerning to many levels. So what happened last year, towards the end of the year, across the country, Ghanaians woke up and they saw these billboards across the country starting from September, very neatly branded billboards with the person or persons surrounding this single person with his face covered with a mask. So the man in the mask, so Ghanaians were asking, but who is this? Of course, people started speculating the identity of the individual behind the mask. And eventually the movement was launched. But before that, we saw that a disgruntled candidate, a very senior member of the New Patriotic Party, in the person of Alan Chermentin, left the political party and founded a movement, all right? The movement for change. Then comes the young man, Nana Kwame Bediako, launching his third force movement. Well, with this new addition to already a landscape that is full with political parties, people are beginning to ask questions and they are excited. But I'm sure a lot of people will be disappointed in the sense that whether we have these new forces and the others that are there, that what Ghana has succeeded and has consolidated is a two-party system that is dominated by the NDC and the MPP. And that the 2024 December election, anybody who is an observer and looking at this space, the contest is between the NDC and the MPP. And that is how they've structured the political system. Of course, there are implications as to how these political parties have alternative power. But what is important and what I'm trying to emphasize here is the political organization that the Fourth Republican dispensation has evolved. That is a very strong political party system, well institutionalized, but the power will always alternate between the NDC and the MPP. And that even if there's a rupture within these two major political parties, that rupture would not make any sense. What they are likely to do, maybe push the election into a runoff, but power would be shared between the governing MPP and the opposition New Patriotic Party. As to the portion of power that these guys are going to get is we will see when we get to December. So that is what I want to talk on when it comes to political parties and how they prepared for the elections in December. That yes, the major political parties are well prepared. One ticket is complete, the other one is yet to be completed, but that when it comes to real and effective campaigning, the others will come. But it's between the National Democratic Congress and the governing New Patriotic Party. So I will end here. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your submission. Actually, the fact that power keeps alternating between the two major political parties is a very interesting and interesting conversation in Ghana right now. And we wait to see what happens in December. Our next speaker is Ms. Michelle Nkrumah. She is the Assistant Administrator at Get Fund and the Executive Director of Leo Foundation. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Sharon. When Madam Rose was speaking, I was just smiling because all my submissions I've noted here was basically on women. But then I think we have some similarities and we have a little bit of an add-on and some questions And for me, I believe that yes, of course, we have had a masses, we have pushed for women voices to be in parliament, to be part of the policy makers, to also promote women. But Sharon, if you look at the numbers, we are impressively from 2004, we had about, I think 2004, we had about 25, then 2008, we had about 20, then we moved to 30, then we moved to 40. We've had numbers. We are not so okay, but we are hoping that it gets better. But the question has been that there had been about 3 bills in Parliament. The Affirmative Action Bill, it has been in Parliament forever. We are wondering what is happening. We've been following and we are hoping that something good can come out of it. But the other two, the paternity and the maternity, it was being pushed by Honorable Susu. The questions I kept asking, we push, we are hoping women will be at the desk, they'll be at the table, they understand the perspective of women, they are able to push for what we would want, but then would have our women be at the decision table, and unfortunately, there's some sort of a silence. So we would rather find CSOs pushing for agenda for women. We'll find even the Ministry for Gender Social Protection, you don't really see them do much, but you'd rather see CSOs pushing for women, women perspectives being pushed and women bills being pushed. My worry is, if we keep advocating for women and would still find women being a part of our politics, our parliamentary processes, and we still don't get results, then there's a challenge. Because then what becomes of us if we are supporting you and we are not even seeing results? So my headache has been, currently we have the NDC outdooring the vice presidential running mate as a woman, Professor Gina Nkrumah. I'm so excited to see it. And we are hoping that at the highest level, when we find her there, it won't become the usual we have known. The narrative will change. The narrative won't become, we are told women, there's no corruption, women are empowered, there can't be a lot of corruption and all of that. We are hoping that all of that will be able to change, so that when you're fighting and advocating for women to be empowered, to be a part of decisions, to be part of elections, you are proud to do so, because you know when you do so, you get quality results and numbers to be able to boast of. Maybe I may be wrong, but maybe we should also look at how they join and why they also join. The passion behind wanting to be a part of decisions and the reasons for that. Currently, as Madam Rose said, the NPP, unfortunately, a number of women have lost their seats. And now you can see the fire being ignited in the NDC. Forgive me if we are doing NPP NDC. I think that when you do a survey, most of the numbers you are getting are from these two parties. So that is how come you get that. But then the question is, why would you be in power? You've been a constituency rep for about 4 years and decide I can't go again as a woman. Would you want a woman to advocate for you again to contest? Or you would want us to sit and say, let's advocate for a man who would advocate for women? These are questions that run through my mind as a woman. And it gets worrying that we are progressing, or we may not know where we are going. But hopefully, we are hopeful that in the coming years, the narrative will change. And when it does so, we would come around and resolve and also advocate for women and be at the policy desk to push for women's rights and bills being passed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I think this is a great addition to the submission that Dr. Rose gave when it comes to the full, what encompasses representation. That is not just about numbers, but it's also about results. I think both submissions go well, very well. So our last speaker is, he was once my lecturer and my supervisor, and he's now the associate professor of political science and the head of politics and history department in KNUST. Over to you, Professor Edward Brenya.
Thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon to panelists and members that are online with us this afternoon. I think the question that poses is that this year being the year of election, what are we expecting? Are we going to see a boom in democracy or numbers are going to decrease. And as we look at the Ghanaian context, the issue about transition of power from 92, the party system, how the duopoly has emerged, and other things has been talked about. So I'm going to focus more on what drives people to the poll, right? You realize that democracies in every country does function well when the electorates believe in the system and when they feel the system delivers what it wants. As Dr. Joseph earlier indicated, clearly, when you talk to many Ghanaians this time around, there's a bit of disappointment. Many indicating that they might not go to the poll at all. And we saw evidence of that in the some of the by-election that we had. If you look at that of Nkrumah, if you look at the numbers that went to the poll in 2020 and compare it to the numbers that voted during the by-election, it raises a question. The recent Ejoso one is similar, right? Where people seems not to be interested in the process that is highly believed to have been the best process that would have delivered the public goods that they felt were not delivered during the military time. My fear when it comes to consolidation of democracy is what democracy has now turned to be. Now democracy seems to be commercialized, where you have a system where voters openly request that they sell their votes, right? At Ejoso, at Nkrumah, you see people saying that, well, if you want me to go and vote, then you need to pay me for my vote. Then we are seeing the other side, where the elected officials also think they must buy the vote. It creates a problem for representation. Because if I buy your vote and I go to parliament, the question is whether I owe you representation because it was sold, I bought it, right? And on the other side, there's a bit of disappointment where electorate citizens believe that if I don't sell the votes, nothing will happen. Once the person gets elected, nothing happens. And as we go into 2024 election, and I must repeat, as the earlier speakers have said, Ghanaians love democracy. When you talk to people who had lived through the military coup d'etats and military governments, regimes, you hear what they tell you. No matter how wise democracy is, it does not compare to military regimes. So Ghanaians love democracy. The biggest problems that I feel Ghanaians are now challenged with is the ability of democracy and those that are elected through democracy to be able to deliver the public goods that people feel they need, and that pushes people to have faith so that our democracy might consolidate. If we don't have a system that would always push people to the poll, if you don't have a system that would make people love to go and register and vote, if you are having the current system where the executive is so powerful that the executives, when they assume power, is able to manipulate the institutions of power and use it to achieve whatever they want, then you're going to have a system where people gradually lose faith because of the inability of the state to provide the things that they want to. And I think that 2024 might see some apathy in terms of numbers of people that goes to the poll if nothing happens. I think I'll stop here and then we can get back later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. So many interesting things have been mentioned. We have a lot of questions in the chat box, so we're going to move straight to the questions from the chat box. This one is from Gladys. She says, what difference would having a female vice presidential candidate for the NDC make in this 2024 election? Rumor has it that MPP is currently not considering a female voice presidential candidates. So I'm going to give this question to Dr. Rose to answer, and if Michelle would want to add anything, that would be great. Do we have Dr.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, Sharon. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that is a question that has been coming up since NDC once again nominated the Honorable Professor to be his vice presidential candidate. I think we all know that in the previous elections, she was nominated as such. Now, for us as women's rights organizations, when a woman gets something which we think elevates her and also has the potential of elevating other women, we are always happy, because I think that empathy is important. I think that supporting women is important. And that is what we as women's rights organizations have worked in Ghana to achieve. And so we have absolutely nothing against a woman being appointed as a vice presidential candidate. In fact, we would even go further and say, why not a presidential candidate coming from the ranks of women? Be that as it may, anytime we don't mind whichever party it's coming from. I think enough critique has been made about the dominance of these political parties, but we are always happy when they nominate women for positions, public positions, and so on. And so when the nomination came, as we did 4 years ago, and we have done this year as well, we have come out to congratulate her. Having said that, what we are aiming at as women is a critical mass of women. And so if you nominate a vice presidential candidate, of course, with such a high caliber, the assumption is that through her, many more women can enter into the public space. It has not always been the case, because we know that when some women get into power, they face 1 or 2 challenges, and therefore they are not able to realize the vision of promoting women's rights and that sort of thing. So I think that it is okay for them, but it's not a guarantee that women's needs and concerns will be sufficiently addressed, because it has always been like that in other spaces. The NDC, I think maybe because last 4 years they did it, they want to try it again, but actually they didn't get them the votes. In the past 4 years, it actually didn't get them the votes, because I think it was like too little, too late. With regard to the NPP, for us, we know male leaders who have played very useful roles in the public space, in the organizations that they have worked in civil society. So yes, we want to see women in public office, but at the same time, if the vice presidential candidate of a political party is a man and he delivers on the issues of inclusivity, on the issues of women's rights, on creating a pluralistic society, a society that makes sure that the majority of the citizens are able to have meaningful education, they have their daily bread, they have good places to stay, good health care and all of that, then the move towards democratic governance would have been realized. And that's what we are looking for. So yes, we want the women there. We want women to be appointed and all of that, but it is not a guarantee that our democracy will be consolidated once a woman is there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. I'm going to give the platform to Professor Nick Cheeseman. He has a question.
You are not supposed to come here.
Hi everyone. So I wanted to sharpen us a little bit, if I may, and move us to the sort of question of where the election may be won and lost, right? So one of the things we know is that in general, every time we have 2 elections in Ghana and one party wins, we expect a rotation of power, right? There's been a general drift in the last few elections. We also know that we've got a government struggling because of the economic problems for popularity. So a lot of people might be expecting an opposition victory and a transfer of power this time around, based on patterns we've seen in the past. In my experience of Ghana, so I spent the 2016 election in Ho, there's two kind of ways that we start to see that happen, right? One is that we've got certain swing areas in Ghana where we swing from one party to another around elections. But the other thing that became very clear to me in Ho in 2016 was in that election, a lot of ruling party supporters simply didn't go to the polls because they were frustrated, they were alienated. So it wasn't in that case that in that part of Ghana, it wasn't that there was a vote that increased for the opposition. It was that the ruling party votes collapsed and people stayed at home. And one of the things that people said to us was, we can't actually vote for the other party. We can't bring ourselves to do that, but we can stay home and give change a chance. There was a kind of recognition of not voting for somebody else, but staying home, not delivering your high turnout, and that potentially being an opportunity. So I wanted to ask people on the panel, maybe people like George, Joe, Jeff, etc., Edward, who look at the political parties, who look at the space. Where are we likely to see the big battles this time round in terms of the vote? Is it going to be about turnout? Are there swing areas that might go one way or the other? Are the key things that you'll be looking for in terms of anticipating who might actually be victorious in this one? So over to whoever would like to have a stab at that first.
Okay.
Okay, Doug, I think I would want to take a bite on this. I just as you rightly indicated, if you look at democracy generally, not just in Ghana, in many instances, you take the US elections, for instance, you realize that anytime the Republicans or the Democrats are in opposition and their people decide to go out to vote, then oftentimes you do see changes in government. And just as it happened in 2008, when there was transition of power, you realize that there was apathy in Ashanti region. Ashanti and Eastern region still holds a very key when it comes to deciding the outcome of election. Yes, for the swing areas in the Accra and others, yes, you're still going to have this mobilization where it is going to be 50-50, but depending upon where it swings to, right? If the MPP is getting a lot of the vote from the swing areas, then to a large extent, it goes in the favor of the party that is voted for. But Ashanti and Eastern become very key in the sense that, in sense of the numbers that the region controls, right? So just as the MPP recently, the chief of staff indicated at one of their rallies that if NPP should win just Ashanti region, that they are okay, right? If they can get the numbers in Ashanti region, that they are okay. If you look at the limited registration right now, the numbers that are coming up, it's still Ashanti region. Ashanti Eastern still leading. What I made reference to initially, which had to do with the by-elections, right? You already start to see apathy setting in. Bear in mind, during the by-election, you get all the big wins. The president, the vice president, all party gurus are there so that they can mobilize the base. Yet, you see apathy setting, you see numbers going down. For me, that is a feel of what is likely to happen in the 2024 election. As people are disappointed with what they thought they should have received. And let me put it blank that, yes, the MPP is doing a lot, but unfortunate is that they promised too much than they could buy. So irrespective of what you do, nobody sees what is going on. Corruption is on the ascendancy. People are tightening their bets, but yet they are feeling the hunger. So for this reason, people are not happy with the current state of affairs. And economic book, pocketbook, has always been very vital when it comes to elections like this. We're having a presidential candidate for the very incumbent party that seems to disagree with everything that the party is doing currently, right? So if people do not get the hope that the vice president becoming the president will change things based on what is happening, if people do not get the hope that their pocketbook is going to change, that things are going to be better economically, then there is a likelihood that we're going to see an apathy in Ashanti region, apathy in the strongholds of the ruling party. And when that happens, we might not see increases in voter turnout when you take away the normal percentage increases per year, the yearly votes. You might not see a situation where majority are shifting from, let's say, the MPP to NDC, right? But rather going to see a case where in events that Asante vote is affected, it is affected by the fact that people, because of disappointment, are going to stay home. Two, the emergence of people like Alan Chamatin. You saw what happened at Ejuso. Bear in mind, also Jomi is a strong supporter of Alan Chamatin. Look at what happened in the last by-election, where Alan Chamatin was able to amass a lot of votes from what would have been traditionally the MPP votes. If this should repeat itself in areas where you have independent candidates swinging up, and several of the people from Chamatin's camp are emerging as independent candidates at the parliamentary level. If things like that is happening, then not only are you going to feel the effects of apathy, but a division of the people who decide to go to the vote. And that, I think, might be not too well for the Nkrumah party if things should go now, right? That is, if the election was held today. I don't know what happened from tomorrow, but if the election was held today, what we are seeing now may not be so good for the incumbent party. And I think that to a large extent may decide the outcome of 2024 election.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your submission. We still have a few more questions here. This one is addressed to Professor George Bob-Milliar.
Sharon, can I quickly add to the question on the difference that a female president makes, I mean, vice presidential candidate makes? I think Dr. Mensah-Kutin made a very good point with regard to having a female president, but I think that putting aside the fact that, with all due respect to the men here, that we are seeing a system where gradually women are becoming better managers of society than men, right? And also taking into consideration, just as Dr. Mensah-Kutin indicated, that when you look at the population divide, the number of women in Ghana who for a very long time have not had the kind of representation, I believe that beyond having a female as a vice president, we are going to see a role model. Now, there are questions about participation. We have a culture that to a large extent is not very motivating in terms of attracting women. Women face all kinds of challenges. And I believe that just as Obama did for the Americans, seeing a Black person in the White House, that if the NDC is able to win power, or probably this time around when they are presenting a candidate, looking at the current economic hardship that people are going through, people will now have to find a reason. And when I talk about people, I'm talking about people that is mostly affected by the current economic hardship, will now have to look up to something that will put them to the pool. And I believe that seeing a woman that they know thinks and acts and feel the pain that everybody, majority are feeling now, it may be one of the reasons why people will now have to say, now, let's try this and see the difference. And I think that that alone psychologically makes a lot of difference in terms of motivating, serving as role model for women and for our young daughters and nieces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are two questions here that I want to address to Professor George Bob-Milliar. This one is about to what extent does partisanship in local governance influence the electoral fortune of political parties in national elections, despite being illegal according to local governance acts? And there's another question about why newer and smaller political parties struggle to participate in upcoming elections despite the consistent underperformance of the NDC and the NPP over time? Over to you, Paul.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, in terms of participation in local governance, the Local Government Act is very clear. But increasingly, we've seen that political parties have hijacked local governance as well. And party activists now openly campaign with party colors. So if you go to local assemblies, you see that many of the assembly members either belong to the NDC or the NPP. In the last election, according to the political parties, if you believe them, that yes, the NDC claimed that a lot of the assembly members that got elected are members of the NDC. It's an open secret. We know that the assembly system has become politicized. We just pretend that it's non-partisan, but it's very partisan. What we were expected to do is just to endorse that so that we could elect our local mayors to work effectively, but we haven't been able to do that. That is the response to the first one. The second one, when it comes to the minor parties, yes, the minor parties have not performed very well, and it's due to Ghana's own political system. Even though the constitution talks of a multi-party system, we realize that over years we've seen how these two political parties have entrenched themselves. But of course, it's because of mobilization, how they've been able to mobilize resources and be able to represent the party in the national legislature. What the minor parties have failed to do is to come together and unite. You see many of these minor parties who like to put themselves under the Nkrumah's umbrella. What stops them from coming together so that they will pool their resources? Elections in Ghana, as Prof. Brenya said, very expensive, okay? Yes, so the only way they can be effective is to pool their resources together and present a very united front. They haven't been able to do that. And of course, I've argued that it's due to party patronage. We like the big man mentality. So you see these one man, one woman parties that pretend that they are viable, but of course, they have no representation in parliament. When it comes to national elections, the vote share that they get is nothing to write home about. But every year, as we begin to see them, they're beginning to Ghana and to also make a point that they're relevant. But you and I, who understands this terrain, know that they don't bring anything to the table. It's just to waste our time and to also excite us, because party politics also comes with fun. And the fun bit is when these minor parties present their platforms and try to make themselves. But it's the system that we've consolidated and institutionalized over the years that is making it almost impossible for a third force to come out. All right. I always say that for a third force to come out, you need to have a like of J.J. Rawlings or an Nkrumah that can excite people and pull people from the two major political parties. But that, as we have them now, a third force is not feasible, at least perhaps in our lifetime. It may become some other time when these two major political parties have misgoverned, to the extent that Ghanaians are just fed up and will follow another label. Other than that, they would be there and will continue to dominate. The minor parties will run for office, but they won't be able to. Their strategy is that when there's a runoff, so for many of them that we see trying to angle and pushing themselves, they would pray for a runoff. And if there's a runoff where they can also bargain and try, but other than that, the minor parties have suffered because of these two dominant parties. They did have access to resources. As a result, they've deepened their roots in the Ghanaian society, and for a very long time, we'll have to deal with these two major political parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Moving on, there seems to be a lot of questions on the confidence that Ghanaians have on the Electoral Commission and the various democratic institutions, and whether they will be able to run a free and fair administration in the upcoming election. So I would like to direct that to Professor Jeffrey, if you would want to address the people are expressing concerns as to whether we can trust the Electoral Commission and the other democratic institutions.
Well, thank you. I think that the controversy about the Electoral Commission is somewhat misplaced. I think it's done a good job under the circumstances. I think the wider issue is about the lack of faith in democratic institutions more generally. And because Ghana's politics are so polarized between the two major parties, then any kind of democratic institution which appears to be objective would always be regarded by the other side as non-objective, as favouring the one party over another. So I think the Electoral Commission issue is largely about confidence more widely in democracy in Ghana. And we've heard from all the speakers, the democracy is regarded as a welcome system, but the form of democracy which is taking place in Ghana now is not regarded as necessarily the best which could be delivered. If I could just comment about the issue about women, I think it's highly important for there to be prominent women within politics, but I don't believe that if a woman is elected as vice president or is chosen as vice president, it will make any difference whatsoever to how power is dispersed within Ghana. There is no real evidence that because a woman is a woman, she has an influence on government which would enable women more generally to be advantaged. My own country, United Kingdom, for 13 years had a woman in power, Margaret Thatcher, who you've no doubt heard of, but she did very little indeed to advance the position of women within the UK. So I'm not sure that the issue is really about whether the Ghanaian system would be changed dramatically by having more women in positions of power, because they wouldn't really be in positions of power, because women in Ghana struggle to express themselves politically, and certainly at the higher echelons of government. For me, the key thing here is the youth. Youth unemployment is very, very high in Ghana right now. There's a lot of anger amongst the youth. We've seen Fix the Country and other groups trying to bring the issue of youth unemployment and youth underrepresentation to the fore. The Electoral Commission, for example, can do nothing about that. And once again, the position of youth in Ghanaian society is generally a subservient one. Those in power are generally old. The president is 80 years of age, for example. And I think that the election will pivot upon whether young people believe they have a stake in the country, whether they just want to depart for greener pastures, and whether they will become activists enough to change the outcome of the election. I can see the election being a fairly turgid affair with a low turnout and nothing really resolved in terms of the democratic institutions in the country.
Thank you so much, Prof. Indeed, there's been a lot of conversation about how most of the political leaders in Africa are older than the overall average age in the country, and Ghana is no different. So this is a conversation that we can keep having until we get to the election polls. I'm going to direct this question to Michelle. Riding off of what Prof said about women's participation in elections, there's a question about the societal perception of women in politics and if Ghana is ready to fully accept and support women in politics. And then there's another one about how we can train women, maybe right after their national service, train them in politics so that when they do get into positions of power, they will be able to deliver because they've received the training. If you would want to address these two questions. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, so I was so happy to hear my Professor Edward Brenya speak highly of Professor Jenano Pukwajiman and lift up our spirits that there's something good that can come out of her nomination, and when she finally becomes a vice president, supposing Ghanaians vote for the NDC, there'll be something good from her end. I'd want to comment about the women participation and training from the younger age. I think currently, if you look at the NUC, the National Union of Ghana Students, and the University Student Association of Ghana, most of the student leaders that are coming up are women. We currently have a number of local NUCs presidents that are women, and they are currently taking up the leadership roles. They are learning the politics here and there. They're learning how to speak. They're learning how to govern. So I believe that we would get there. It's going to take time for us to get there. It's going to not necessarily take a longer time. But the question I have is, are women going to vote for women? Because we've had a woman contest for presidency, which was the former First Lady, Nana Akufo-Addo and we didn't see a lot of women vote for her. If women are going to believe in women, that women can actually represent us very well and also put a vote and add to our voices out there, I think it would do a lot of work for us. But unfortunately, in Ghana, if you look at the history of Ghana, women do not vote according to women. They would rather vote according to the party line. So, for example, if somebody's from the Ashanti region, they would rather want to vote for what we know, the NPP, because it is the NPP they believe that is in their blood, as it's always termed as. But then this year, I want to believe that this year there will be a change where there's been a call actually from the Ashanti region market women asking Dr. Bob-Milliar to select a woman as his running mate. When I saw the interview, I was asking, are they going to vote for this woman if he even nominates somebody as so? And will they, if they are going to do so, if he doesn't nominate a woman, are they going to throw their vote and support for Professor Jena Nopoko-Agyemang? That's the question we ask. So if women are going to support women and believe that women can represent ourselves very well and also work effectively and bring results to the table, I am sure we would get there. We hope that it doesn't take too long of a time, but gradually, progressively, we get there. Have I answered all the questions?
Yes, I think you have. You touched on the training of women. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to throw in one more question, which is open for any of the panel members to answer, and then I'll hand over to Professor Nick Cheeseman. This question is about messaging, political messaging. It says, do messages have an impact potentially on voters' decision? Any indication from any data on the role of messages of political parties, especially NPP and NDC, on the decision of voters this time, which is this year? So this question is open to all the panel members. Any of you can answer.
Well, so let me agree with you that messaging is very critical, depending on the kind of message you have and how you package it, and those that you target with your message, then you are likely to be heard. Now, with these two political parties, these two dominant political parties, what we are hearing as women is that for years, this has not been a message. And then what we are hearing about MPP is that you are telling us that you want to break the 8. Now, if you want to break the 8, there must be evidence. There must be evidence that our economic situation has improved. There must be evidence, there is less corruption, and so on. And so it's like marking a paper, a test paper, and saying that you are saying you want to break the 8, but the evidence you are presenting does not allow us to vote for you to break the 8. So I think that messaging is very important. But at the same time, when you look at the messages, you can see that they don't bite. They really don't bite because there is nothing to offer. And I think this ties in with what one of my colleagues earlier said about people becoming very complacent and not willing to even come out to vote. That is going to be a reality for this election. There are so many people who do not know what to vote for, even though they may have passion for a particular party. Again, within the messages, you don't see any sense of disaggregation in terms of targeting particular groups of people and saying that this is what we have for you, this is why you should vote for us. But Jeffrey mentioned the youth, which is very, very important. And for us, young women constitute a very core group in our population. And yet there is no target information for young people. And all they are seeing is this monetization. What they are seeing is this corruption. And so even as they acquire the leadership skills for the future, the leadership skills they are acquiring is only rooted in the status quo, which is basically about money, about grabbing, about the self, and so on. So there is really no passion for transformation in the society. And the messaging factor is also very critical, which they are not sufficiently addressing.
Thank you so much, Doc. I am good. Yeah, I'm going to give a few minutes. Yeah, Paul.
Yes, so on the issue of messaging, I think that we have to bear in mind that even when we look at the developed democracies, their messages are presented based on ideological lines, right? And the message, in most instances, sort of motivates or rally the base, right? You get people who, based on the messages that are coming, will now want to be engaged in the election, right? Unfortunately for us in Ghana, we don't have clear ideological lines. Ideologically, it's just about whatever I will say and I'll get elected. So you have the MPP that would want to be defined as the rightist party, who does everything that, characterize the leftist party, right? The welfare, everything, every welfare policy that have been adopted in this country was done by the NPP. Then you get the NDC come in behaving as a consecutive party, right? Now, those messages that are presented in most instances is to get the base to be active. Right? So you get a lot of NDC talking more about hardship, talking about promises that were made, talking about the failure of government. Those messages are not meant for the MPP, right? Because in Ghana, we have 40-40. Each of these two political parties have the 40-40. The difference of who wins the party then becomes the one that is able to speak to a very few core people, the electorates, those that want to change their vote, those pay attention to what is going on. Unfortunately, many a time when this message comes, these people are not able to decipher what exactly the difference that the message will make. And I believe strongly that when it gets to this point where they feel that hope is a little bit down, then they pay a little bit attention to the one that offers message that gives them a little bit of hope to a change of direction. Bear in mind, people get to a point where they are so afraid that they cannot invest their money. They're thinking about what will take me to take this money and invest. What will be done differently? So when they see messages coming in that promises an action that is different from the status quo that they are not happy with, then you see people start to pay attention to that and say, maybe it is worthwhile paying attention to this message. And that's why we're seeing the MPP presidential candidate in most of the time trying to dissociate himself from the status quo, even though he's still part of government, because he feels that if I continue in this direction, it is less likely that people would have confidence in me. Now, let me present a different side of the government so that people can amass this confidence. And I believe that that is how the message now targets. But as for the 40-40, no amount of words will change them. They are going to vote because they are MPP. They are going to vote because they are NDC. But rather, what will rather get the vote active so that they can start chanting and moving and then go out to vote. And that is what the message should be targeting. And that's what I believe the message targets in Ghana.
Right. Thank you so much, Paul. I'll hand over now to Professor Nick Cheeseman.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for such a wonderful conversation and debate. It's been very insightful. I've got a quick question I'm going to throw to George, if that's okay, George, just before we wrap up, because I've got a brilliant PhD student who I had. He's now a doctor, Obor Katando. Obor, if you're listening, well done. He wrote a fantastic dissertation on primaries, party primaries. I think you know him, George, in some of his research. And one of the things that he really shows, right, is that in a lot of places, as in the UK, the election is not the general election, it's the primary. If you've got a one-party district, it's all about the primary in terms of who you get. And he shows us that actually a lot of party primaries are dominated by a very small selectorate in which money plays a big role, in which connections play a big role, which are often exclusionary of younger candidates and women. And so we've talked about the general elections, which is, of course, what our remit was. But it might be really interesting for viewers who aren't so familiar with Ghana, to hear about the significance of party primaries and actually determining who gets presented to the electorate in the first place in the general election. So, George, do you have any reflections on primaries in Ghana, whether or not they block certain types of candidates, whether the role of money in politics actually starts at the primary level rather than the general election, and if anything can be done to kind of reform the primaries to sort of reverse or change some of those effects?
All right, thank you very much. Yes, I was the examiner of his PhD thesis, and I enjoyed reading it. Very good work. But I felt the question should have been directed to my colleague, Professor Brenya, about party primaries. Yes, it's very important. The party primaries are structured in a very difficult way. That one, yes, the party system or party bigwigs have candidates they want to win by all means, and they want to support them. And you find people who are independent coming into these primaries and will have to raise their own resources. And the whole system has been monetized to the extent that it's almost becoming very, let me say, impossible for party members who are not well resourced to succeed in winning party primaries. And that is where the danger is, that, and Professor Brenya mentioned it, that you get elected having invested a lot of your resources at the primary level, and your party succeeds at the general election. You are now a policy maker. You sit in the National Assembly. Of course, you've invested in this election, and as a rational being, you expect to recoup your investment, and that is where the challenge is. But of course, party primaries are exciting, but very expensive, and we are getting people elected who, in my opinion, are not people who are interested in community development at the grassroots, who are interested in national development. But for many, especially the very young ones, this is a career opportunity, because party politics increasingly has become very lucrative. And yes, you see that. So they use the party primaries to get in. But of course, it's a very lengthy process. And there's some work that we're currently looking at, where we look at what we are calling the social pathways that party activists use into getting elected. And it will take you a very long time to invest in the area that you want to represent to succeed in getting nominated within the party ranks and eventually getting elected at the national level. So that is the bit on party primaries at that level.
Thanks so much, George. Thanks. That's great. And thanks again for doing the PhD. It's always wonderful when someone steps in to do that role, because vivas are so demanding of your time. So we do appreciate that. Thank you once again. We've talked a lot about gender and other issues here today. I don't know if we had the answers to some of those challenges in Ghana, but Sharon, you definitely done a better job as moderator than I could have done. So I think maybe that's a career there in public leadership for you after this. Thank you for doing such a good job. Thank you to the speakers. It's rare to have a team of speakers as eminent as this and everyone stick to time. That enabled us to have so many questions and a great discussion. So thank you to the speakers for coming on. This was the first of our shows on the Ghanaian elections. We hope to do one closer to the elections, where we can see whether some of the predictions and ideas that we've talked about today come to pass. And of course, Sharon will hopefully agree to moderate that one as well. We should also say thanks to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. They funded Sharon's postdoc. They bring many, wonderful, fantastic, talented students to us, and that's really important for our work at the University of Birmingham and also for the career pathways of those students. So thank you to the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Thank you to everyone for coming. This video will be available via the CEDAR website at the University of Birmingham. If you're interested in us and our work, just Google CEDAR University of Birmingham. You'll see our website. You'll see blogs, podcasts, videos, and more. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. So many people have stuck through, which I think shows how high quality the discussion was. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you in Ghana, but also online in the rest of the coming year. Take care, everybody.
Take care, Nick. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so
Sharon,
much.
bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.